In 1932, a farmer named Earl Hutchins from rural Oklahoma made a decision that would save his family's life. He had $1, 17 left in his pocket, no crops had survived the drought, and the bank had already sent a man to the door twice that month. His wife Clara stood in the kitchen looking at bare shelves, and their 3 kids hadn't eaten a full meal in 4 days. But Earl didn't panic. He walked to the shed, picked up his grandfather's tools, and started doing things that most Americans today have completely forgotten how to do. Things that weren't taught in schools anymore. Things the modern system has made sure you'd never need, or so they want you to believe. By the end of that winter, his family had not only survived, they had enough preserved food to last through spring, a repaired farmhouse, and neighbors coming to them for help. He never bought a single thing he didn't absolutely have to. And the 20 tricks he used? Almost none of them are taught today. In fact, some of them are actively discouraged. Some are even illegal in certain states. If you think that's a coincidence, keep watching. Make sure you're subscribed before we get to number 1, because that one alone could change the way you think about food, money, and independence forever. Number 20 will surprise you, but number 3 might genuinely make you angry. Number 20. Fat rendered from kitchen scraps was never thrown away during the Depression. Every piece of pork belly, every bacon strip, every bit of chicken skin that came through a Depression-era kitchen went directly into a cast iron pot or a tin can kept near the stove. When the fat melted off and cooled, it solidified into a golden, shelf-stable cooking medium that families used for frying, baking, spreading on bread, and sealing leather. This wasn't a poverty habit. It was a precision survival skill. Lard rendered correctly, with the right heat and skimmed clean, lasts for up to a year at room temperature, and far longer if salted. Today, the food industry sells you bottles of vegetable oil at $8 a pop and tells you animal fat will kill you. They've spent decades funding studies to make you afraid of the very substance that kept American families alive for generations. Families like Earl's kept 3 or 4 cans of rendered fat at all times. When there was nothing in the house, there was still fat. And with fat and a handful of flour, you could feed people. This one trick alone eliminated an entire category of grocery spending. And the flavor. Anyone who has fried potatoes in properly rendered lard knows there is no comparison. Number 19. Depression families grew food in every available inch of ground. Not just in backyards, in front yards, along fences, in window boxes, in old boots and buckets and cracked chamber pots. They planted vertically up the sides of barns. They tucked beans between fence posts. They grew herbs in tin cans on windowsills. The concept of ornamental landscaping, grass you couldn't eat, flowers that served no purpose, shrubs planted only for appearance, was a luxury they couldn't afford, and one they didn't miss. What they understood, and what most modern Americans have lost entirely, is that a small plot of ground worked with real knowledge produces an astonishing amount of food. A 10-foot by 12-foot garden, properly planted with high-yield Depression-era crops like pole beans, Swiss chard, turnips, and winter squash, can feed one adult through the summer months. Many municipalities now have zoning rules that restrict food gardens in front yards. Some HOAs fine homeowners for growing vegetables in visible areas. Think about what that means for a moment. Number 18. They saved every seed. Not just any seeds, they specifically chose open-pollinated, heritage varieties that would breed true from year to year. They understood something that the modern seed industry has spent billions of dollars trying to make you forget. A seed is not a product. A seed is a living, replicable resource. Earl Hutchins kept his seeds in paper envelopes inside a tin box in the root cellar, labeled in pencil, organized by type and planting date. He hadn't bought a seed in 11 years before the Depression hit. Today, the majority of commercial vegetable seeds sold in the United States are hybrid F1 varieties that do not reliably reproduce. If you save the seeds from a hybrid tomato and plant them, you get unpredictable results, or nothing at all. This is not an accident. The seed industry profits when you come back to buy seeds every single season. Heritage seed saving costs them nothing and saves you everything. If you're not saving seeds yet, That tin box in Earl's cellar is still the most powerful agricultural tool ever invented. Leave a comment below telling me one vegetable you've tried to grow this year. I want to know. Number 17. Soap was made at home from wood ash and leftover fat, and it worked better than most things you can buy today. The process is called saponification, and Depression-era women understood it intuitively. You take the ash from hardwood fires, leach it with water to create lye, then combine that lye carefully with rendered fat at the right temperature, and you get a hard, powerful soap that cleans skin, clothing, dishes, and floors without a single synthetic chemical. It costs almost nothing to make. The raw materials come from things you were already going to burn and things you were already going to discard. Today's cleaning product industry is worth over $60 billion annually in the United States alone. The average American family spends more than $700 a year on cleaning and personal care products. Every single one of those products is a replacement for something your great-grandparents made themselves for free. Number 16. Water was never wasted. Depression families collected rainwater in barrels, cisterns, and any clean container they could find. Dishwater was reused to water gardens. Bathwater was shared. Youngest child last, since the water was still warm and the family couldn't afford to heat it twice. Gray water from cooking and washing was directed toward fruit trees and vegetable rows rather than drains. The modern American home loses thousands of gallons a year to inefficiency. Long showers, half-full dishwashers, running taps. Many states have now moved to restrict or regulate rainwater collection. In some Western states, collecting rain that falls on your own roof is technically illegal or restricted without a permit. A resource that falls from the sky onto your property is being regulated away from you. Earl Hutchins would not have believed it. Number 15. They mended everything. Clothing was darned, patched, taken in, let out, cut down for children, cut up for rags, and finally used as insulation before a single thread was discarded. Shoes were resoled with leather cut from old belts. Buttons were carefully removed from worn-out shirts and stored in jars for reuse. The skill of hand-stitching, once so common that every child learned it, has nearly vanished from American households. Today, the average American throws away approximately 81 pounds of clothing per year. The fast fashion industry depends entirely on the belief that mending is not worth your time. They've priced new garments low enough that repair feels economically irrational. But the Depression taught something different. The true cost of a thing includes what you had to do to replace it. And in hard times, replacement is not always possible. Number 14. Root cellars kept food alive through winter without a single watt of electricity. A root cellar is simply a hole in the ground, dug below the frost line, lined with stone or wood, ventilated carefully to control humidity, and stocked in autumn with everything the growing season produced. Potatoes, carrots, turnips, beets, cabbages, onions, winter squash, and dozens of preserved goods could be stored at near constant temperatures of 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit from October through March. No refrigerator, no freezer, no electric bill. The earth itself was the appliance. Building codes in most modern American cities and suburbs make it extremely difficult or impossible to construct a traditional root cellar. Zoning laws, setback requirements, and permit costs put this technology, which is essentially just a hole in the ground, out of practical reach for most homeowners. A technology that worked for 10,000 years of human history is now effectively illegal in many zip codes. Number 13. Here's something that might make you uncomfortable. Depression families shared everything with their neighbors, and they kept track, not with resentment, but with precision. If Earl borrowed a tool, he returned it before sundown and added a favor: a jar of preserves, an hour of labor, a piece of lumber. If a neighbor's cow got into Earl's field, he fixed the fence himself rather than filing a complaint. This informal economy, sometimes called a gift economy or barter economy, operated entirely outside the banking system and outside the tax system. It required trust, reputation, and community memory rather than contracts and cash. Economist estimates suggest that during the Depression, 30 to 40% of all economic activity in rural America happened through direct exchange and informal reciprocity. It wasn't tracked, it wasn't taxed, it wasn't controlled, and it kept millions of families alive. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. We're getting to the ones they really don't want you to know. Number 12. Fermentation preserved food without refrigeration and without any commercial products whatsoever. Sauerkraut, pickles, fermented beans, kvass, sourdough, vinegar. Depression families fermented constantly because fermentation requires only time, salt, and knowledge. A crock of cabbage packed with salt and left in a cool corner of the cellar becomes sauerkraut that lasts for months and is, nutritionally, more valuable than the fresh cabbage you started with. Wild yeast captured from the air and fed with flour becomes a sourdough starter that can leaven bread indefinitely without commercial yeast, something families during the Depression kept alive for years, passing portions to neighbors, treating it with the same care as a member of the household. The commercial food preservation industry, canned goods, frozen foods, freeze-dried meal kits, exists in large part because Americans forgot fermentation. Relearning it costs nothing. Number 11. Animals were kept even on very small properties. Chickens for eggs, a pig for late-year slaughter, rabbits for meat that required no pasture and almost no feed cost. Depression families understood that a laying hen converts kitchen scraps, insects, and weeds into approximately 250 eggs per year. A single pig fed on waste products from the kitchen and garden produces 150 to 200 pounds of meat, lard, and organ meat, enough to feed a family of 4 for months. Urban zoning laws today prohibit backyard chickens in many American cities. Pig keeping within city limits is restricted nearly everywhere. The irony is that the same cities that restrict food-producing animals allow residents to keep non-producing pets of any size. The legal framework governing what you can raise on your own property was not designed with your food security in mind. Number 10. They fixed things rather than replacing them. Engines, clocks, radios, farm equipment, plumbing, all of it was diagnosed and repaired rather than discarded. This required a specific kind of knowledge. The ability to understand how a thing worked well enough to identify what had failed and return it to function. Depression-era men and women were, by necessity, generalist mechanics. Earl Hutchins rebuilt his truck's carburetor 3 times, with parts he made himself from sheet metal. He rewound the coils on his electric motor when they burned out. He rebuilt his well pump from a description in a library book. Right to repair legislation, laws that would guarantee consumers the ability to fix the products they own, is currently being fought by every major electronics and appliance manufacturer in the United States. The system profits when you replace. It loses when you repair. Number 9. They use the whole animal. When a pig was slaughtered, nothing, not 1 ounce, was wasted. The fat was rendered for lard. The liver, heart, kidneys, and lungs were eaten first, as they don't keep. The intestines were cleaned and used as sausage casings. The ears, feet, and tail were boiled into head cheese or pickled. The bones were cracked for marrow and then simmered for days into stock. Even the blood was cooked into blood sausage. Today, American beef processing discards or renders into pet food the majority of what Depression families would have considered the most valuable parts of the animal. Organ meats, among the most nutritionally dense foods on Earth, are largely absent from mainstream American grocery stores. Nose-to-tail eating is not a trend, it is a technology, one that was erased within a single generation. Number 8. Wild food was a serious and systematic supplement to cultivated food. Depression families foraged deliberately, not as a hobby, but as a strategic addition to the food supply. Dandelion greens, purslane, wood sorrel, lamb's quarters, elderberries, pawpaws, hickory nuts, black walnuts, persimmons, watercress, cattail pollen, wild garlic. These weren't exotic finds. They were known, mapped, and harvested on a predictable seasonal schedule. A woman in rural Missouri named Esther Crane fed her 5 children through 3 consecutive bad harvests primarily on foraged greens, supplemented by stored dried beans and cornmeal. She knew the woods on her property the way a grocer knows his shelves. Every square foot, every season, every species. This knowledge has been almost completely lost in 2 generations. Many parks and public lands now prohibit foraging entirely. On your own property, what you choose to eat from it remains, for now, your business. Number 7. Bartering happened constantly and without any embarrassment. Earl traded 3 days of fence building for a quarter of beef. He traded a bushel of potatoes for a load of firewood. He traded mechanical repair work for canning jars. The barter economy required skills worth trading, which meant that being good at useful things was the primary form of wealth. A man who could fix a well pump, a woman who could deliver a baby, a teenager who could train a horse. These people were wealthy in a way that had nothing to do with dollars. Today, barter above certain thresholds is technically taxable income in the United States. The IRS requires you to report the fair market value of goods and services received in exchange for goods and services provided. The government's ability to tax an exchange between two neighbors trading potatoes for firewood is, practically speaking, near zero. But the fact that they've claimed the right to do so is worth knowing. Go ahead and drop a comment below with the most useful skill you think a person should have. I want to read every single one. Number 6. They built and insulated with what was available. Newspapers packed between walls provided insulation. Rags and sawdust filled gaps. Corn cobs were burned for heat. Every crack was caulked with whatever was at hand: tallow, clay, rags soaked in linseed oil. Depression families understood their homes as systems that retained or lost heat, and they worked those systems obsessively because fuel cost money they didn't have. The modern American home is on average extraordinarily wasteful with heat and cooling energy. Air sealing, which costs almost nothing to do manually, can reduce a home's heating and cooling costs by 10 to 20%. Most Americans never do it. Most landlords never do it. The energy companies profit from inefficiency. Number 5. Debt was treated as a catastrophic last resort rather than a financial tool. Depression families who survived intact were, almost universally, the ones with no debt, or the ones who eliminated debt first and at all cost. The families that lost farms, lost homes, lost everything were, almost universally, the ones who had borrowed against future crops, future wages, future luck. The bank was not a partner. It was a predator with patience. Earl Hutchins' father had told him something his own father told him. Never borrow money to buy something that gets smaller over time. Cars get smaller. Equipment gets smaller. Only land, only knowledge, only skills, only stored food. These hold or grow in value when the world falls apart. The American consumer debt system, credit cards, auto loans, buy now pay later schemes, adjustable rate mortgages, is the most sophisticated debt trap in human history. It was not designed to help you. It was designed to ensure that a portion of everything you earn flows upward, permanently and automatically, to people who already have more than you. Number 4. They grew and stored medicine, not as a supplement to medical care, as a replacement for it, because medical care was simply not available. Elderflower and elderberry for fever and infection. Plantain leaf, the weed that grows in every lawn, for wounds, stings, and inflammation. Yarrow for bleeding. Valerian root for sleep. Ginger for nausea and digestion. Mullein for lung congestion. These weren't folk superstitions. Many of them are now confirmed by clinical research to have genuine pharmacological activity. Depression families maintained herb gardens the way a pharmacist maintains a formulary, systematically, purposefully, with specific intended uses. The pharmaceutical industry is worth over $4 trillion annually. A significant portion of that revenue depends on you not knowing what grows in your own yard. Growing medicinal herbs is entirely legal. Using them is your right. And the knowledge of how to do so has been systematically excluded from every layer of mainstream education for 70 years. Number 3. They communicated in ways that couldn't be monitored, tracked, or taxed. Before you dismiss that as paranoid, understand the context. During the Depression, the government implemented programs that required farmers to destroy crops and livestock to support price controls. In 1933, the EOLA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, paid farmers to plow under cotton, slaughter hogs, and destroy food at a time when millions of Americans were going hungry. The enforcement of these programs depended on information. Communities that communicated privately shared resources quietly, and operated outside visible institutional channels could and did protect themselves and each other. Today's communication infrastructure is the most surveilled in human history. Every digital message, every financial transaction, every GPS movement is logged and potentially accessible. Depression families traded information face to face. They trusted relationships, not platforms. They understood that what couldn't be seen couldn't be controlled. This isn't about hiding. This is about sovereignty, the right to live, work, trade, and communicate without mandatory transparency to institutions that have demonstrably not acted in your interest. Number 2. They homeschooled and passed skills directly from generation to generation without any institutional intermediary. Earl Hutchins taught his oldest son to read with a Bible, a farmer's almanac, and a set of letters scratched in the dirt. His wife, Clara, taught their daughter to sew, preserve, ferment, forage, and calculate household accounts before the girl was 12. Not because they were against formal education, Earl had finished 8th grade and considered himself lucky, but because the skills that kept you alive in hard times were not taught in any school. They were taught in kitchens, fields, cellars, and barns. They were taught by doing, not by listening. The modern education system produces graduates who can pass standardized tests and fill out forms, but cannot feed themselves, repair anything, build anything, or survive any meaningful disruption to supply chains. That is not an accident. A population that depends entirely on institutional systems for its food, its medicine, its shelter, its information, and its skills is an obedient population. The most radical thing Earl Hutchins did was teach his children to be capable. And then there is number 1. The one that wraps every other trick together and makes them all possible. The one that Earl Hutchins said was the single greatest advantage his family had through every year of the Depression. Not a technique, not a tool, not a garden or a cellar or a smokehouse. A mindset. Earl called it thinking from zero. Every single morning, before anything else, he asked himself one question. If everything I depend on disappeared today, what would I do? Not as an exercise in anxiety, as an exercise in clarity. He mapped his dependencies on money, on supply chains, on neighbors, on weather, on luck, and systematically worked to reduce every one of them he could. When he couldn't eliminate a dependency, he built a redundancy. If the well ran dry, he had the rain barrel. If the rain barrel ran dry, he had the creek. If the creek flooded, he had stored water in the cellar. He did this with food, heat, shelter, medicine, and tools. He didn't wait for a crisis to think about what he would do in a crisis. He solved for the crisis before it arrived. This is what the modern world has most thoroughly stripped away from American life. Not a skill, not a technology, not a trick, but the mental habit of independence. The assumption that you are responsible for your own survival and that preparation is a virtue rather than a pathology. The Depression didn't break families like Earl's. It revealed what they had already built when no one was watching. What have you built? What are you building? That's the question that number 1 leaves you with. And it's the only question that matters. This is what 20 million American families did to survive the worst economic collapse in modern history. They didn't wait for the government to save them. In many cases, the government actively made things harder. They worked with what they had. They wasted nothing. They shared everything with people they trusted. They passed knowledge directly to the next generation without asking permission. They stayed out of debt. They grew food. They fixed things. They built community. They were, by every measure, more resilient, more capable, and more genuinely independent than the average American family today. Not because they were special. Because they had no choice. You still have a choice. The question is whether you'll make it before you're forced to. Leave a comment right now telling me which one of these 20 tricks you're going to try first. And if you've already started on any of them, I want to hear about it. Your story might be the thing that gets someone else to start. Every generation that loses this knowledge makes the next generation more vulnerable. Every generation that recovers it makes the next one stronger. Earl Hutchins' grandchildren grew up knowing how to do all 20 of these things. His great-grandchildren mostly do not. Which direction are you going?